Okay, we're going to be covering the TL70 final install in this video. This is the third and final video in our series covering this transmission swap, so if you ordered just the bell housing kit from us or other supporting parts, please refer to our first two videos on setting up the bell housing and the shifter. If you've ordered a complete kit from us and received your crate, go over everything carefully and just verify that nothing is missing or damaged in transit. The straps and the bell housing are all held in by deck screws, and a T25 Torx bit will be needed to unpack everything. Once you get your old transmission removed, go ahead and strip the back of your engine down to the bare crankshaft, as our kit comes with an RB25 flywheel and adapter ring to install in place of your existing factory flywheel and clutch. If you already have a 240mm clutch and flywheel combo, you can retain your clutch pressure plate. If you have a 225mm clutch and flywheel, you will need to either order our South Bend TL70 clutch kit or any off-the-shelf 240mm clutch pressure plate for the Datsun Z Car. You're going to need to remove your bell housing shield and trim the starter area away for proper starter ring gear depth and spline engagement. You can follow the footprint that the starter made from being bolted to it and trim all of that material away. The point is to have the starter bolt directly to the bell housing and completely bypass the bell housing shield. You can either use a bandsaw or you can clamp the shield in a vise and use a cutoff wheel or a sawzall. Once you get the plate back on the engine, we're going to move on to the flywheel and adapter ring install. You can install the flywheel by resting the adapter inside the recess machined into the back of the flywheel, and then install it onto the crank as an assembly. More details as to why this flywheel and adapter ring combination are needed can be found in our part 2 video, as well as further explanation as to why the bell housing shield needs to be trimmed. If you want to skip all of those details, just take our word for it. These two steps are absolutely imperative to get long-term reliable service out of this transmission swap kit. After you've installed the flywheel and torqued the bolts per ARP's instructions, you will need to install the clutch pilot bushing adapter. This step is also absolutely imperative, and if you stray from our instructions, we can guarantee that you will have transmission issues, as we have run into a couple of shops who have installed this kit incorrectly and ran into this exact issue. The clutch pilot bushing adapter needs to be pre-installed into the back of the crankshaft, not installed on the transmission input shaft. This is an interference fit in the back of the crank and requires grease around the tip of the adapter going into the crank and tapping it with a brass hammer or hammer with a brass punch, wooden block, or socket. Install it until it bottoms out. It shouldn't take a ton of force to get it to seat all the way, but one popular method we like to employ is putting the part in the freezer for 30 to 45 minutes and then driving it in while it's still cold. Take extra care not to beat the face of the adapter up, as if it gets out of shape, you will preload the transmission input shaft and cause shifting and dragging issues. Just to reiterate, the same exact condition will result from you installing this pilot bushing adapter on the transmission and then attempting to install it as an assembly, so please make sure you follow this exactly as we specify. What happens is when you install this onto the transmission, you don't get this bottomed out into the crankshaft properly, and it actually adds excessive preload onto the input shaft, causing a stack tolerance issue and lack of oil flow across all of your gears and bearings. We had a customer who could not get the car into reverse with the engine running, and eventually gave up on the swap and sold it on the used market, and it turns out the shop installing the swap skipped this critical step and actually caused the entire issue in the first place. So please take extra care to do this properly. The same condition will also apply if you damage the face of this bushing adapter. If the hole is out of round, it will preload the input shaft. You can now install the clutch. If you've ordered the kit with just the clutch disc, at a certain point in the production run of these we started supplying a clutch alignment tool. However, if you bought one of our kits earlier, you may have to order one off of our Amazon store. It's for a 2018 Subaru BRZ. If you bought the South Bend clutch TL70 clutch kit we offer, it will come with an alignment tool. Install your clutch just like you would install any other clutch, torque your pressure plate bolts to OEM specifications, and then you can move on to installing the transmission assembly. The transmission should slide in relatively easily. You should not have to use the bell housing bolts to pull it into place. If you're at that point, double check your clutch alignment because something is off. You should absolutely never use bell housing bolts to pull the transmission against the engine. That's a great way to break castings or clutch discs. After you've got the transmission installed and bolted to the engine, verify that you have some slack in your clutch fork. If you don't have any slack, the clutch release components are either misinstalled or in a bind, so make sure you correct that first before you go any further. After you've done that, you can install your crossmember and crossmember bushings in place. Your kit will have come with a set of spacers to take up the slack in the factory transmission mount ears, as the factory ears are wider than the crossmember flange that we provide. Next, if you've watched our part 2 video covering the swap, you should have installed the shifter rod link bar in place and prepared to install the shifter rod itself. Although the previous video shows it being done on the bench, this is all accessible from underneath the vehicle and the same steps apply. Next is going to be installing your drive shaft and giving everything a final once over and torque check before lowering the vehicle to work inside. We supply a revised shifter boot that will require some minor modifications to fit with your factory manual transmission shift boot retention plate. You can see we have a factory shifter boot and the TL70 boot next to it. The factory shifter boot fits over the TL70 boot with a little bit of flexing to get it in around the base. There are 4 rubber tangs that need to be cut off in order to get your factory plate to sit flush. Once you've done that, you can drill 4 small holes where the factory plate lines up with your new shifter boot and reuse the factory screws holding it to the transmission tunnel. Lastly, fill the transmission with the gear oil provided in our complete kit, or any comparable synthetic 75W90 gear oil if you're piecing together your own kit. Next, we're going to move on to some driving footage and overall impressions. Alrighty, we're going to be doing a little recap on the TL70. A little bit of a driving review and kind of what to expect from our swap kit, things like that. So shout out to Mr. Boykin for allowing us to use his vehicle for this. He brought us a 77-280. Anyways, Mr. Boykin brought us his 77-280Z. For an auto to manual conversion, and then he also was one of the first to order one of our TL70s when they were still on pre-order / development. And as we worked out all the kinks, we finally were able to get him scheduled in to get the install done. So just like the CD009, one of the things that you're going to notice is it stays in the power band longer because you get an extra gear in between first and 1-to-1, so instead of 4th gear being 1-to-1, it's now 5th gear. And overall, the acceleration, just because of the gearing, seems to be a lot peppier. You know, this is a totally stock 77-280Z. It definitely feels exponentially better than the 4-speed. It seems to accelerate definitely faster than the 4-speed. Compared to the 5-speed, even with a close ratio 5-speed out of a ZX, this one does accelerate a little faster. Compared to our CD009, this one will have a lot less rotating mass. With less rotating mass means less power sucked up spinning the drivetrain and more power to the wheels. Derek over at Datsun Works actually prefers this transmission over the CD009. He's had both in his dual cam 240Z. He makes the dual cam head, and he actually prefers this one more. I'm really liking this short throw shifter from Torque Solutions. And you really should have no reason to be in 6th gear on city driving. You get on highway speeds, you know, you drop it into 6th, cruising overdrive. But 4th or 5th gear for city driving, depending on how fast you're going. You know, typically with these older L motors, you want to float between 2,000 to 3,000 RPM when you're cruising anyways. You don't want to dip below 2,000 RPM unless you're in 1st gear. Because what happens is that lugs the engine. You know, this isn't a small block Chevrolet or an LS swap car where you have all that torque down low. You want to take advantage of all that torque that's at the upper rev range. The other cool thing is it requires a lot less throttle input for rev matching. You know, where some of your taller geared 4 and 5 speeds, you really got to peg the gas to get the engine to rev match. But with the gearing spread on this TL70 coupled with the lightweight RB flywheel that we supply standard with all of our kits, the engine revs up a lot. Not only does the engine rev up faster, it requires less of an RPM jump in between gears for doing that rev match downshifting. So overall, it feels a lot more responsive with this 6-speed in. Now this car, you know, part of the interior is missing. There are quite a few pieces that are loose or rattling. So I can't really give you a good gauge on road noise or operational noise. I can definitely tell you it's significantly quieter than the CD009. You don't have to account for that gear train clatter that seems to be inherent in the design of the CD009. But what we are going to do is I'm going to compare this to Beau's car, which is, Beau is one of our technicians. He also has one of the other Godzilla development vehicles. And he's got a full interior. So even though it's a turbo car and has a bigger exhaust, it's got a full interior to suck up a lot of the noise. So we're going to do a little comparison on the noise on his car. So we've had this swap in your car, what, 2 years?
It's been a while.
Couple years?
Well over 1 for sure. And I drive it a lot.
Talk about like the amount of gear noise or any noises at all from the drivetrain or lack thereof.
Doesn't really. Trans. So you can go right or left. Let's go right.
Yeah.
None of the trans. My diff is bad, so my diff makes noise.
Yeah.
Whenever I put the short shifter in it, this rattles a little bit, but I think it's the bushing that goes
okay.
in. Yeah. Because before it didn't rattle. But
which Boykins didn't do that.
Okay.
But yours is the free shifter that was recalled, and
yeah.
I think that's probably why it was recalled. The bushing was a little too stiff.
Yeah, I mean, I drive this thing pretty often. Usually when I do drive it, it's like 60 miles a day.
Yeah.
And it's great. Cruising on the highway is, my RPMs don't work, but if I had to guess, it's somewhere around like 2,500, somewhere in that range. See what I mean?
Yeah.
Just the bushing. But the ratios are great. I have a 355 rear end. And the ratio is really nice.
Yeah, so with a full interior car, because Boykin didn't have a full interior, but you do, there's like almost no transmission noise at all.
Super,
at least not that I can hear. Yeah, all you're hearing is diff. And this car has Apex control arms in the front and rear, so it's going to translate a little bit more road noise, but even still, it's quiet.
Bad. And my door seals are bad too.
How do you like this transmission paired with a turbo setup?
Oh, it's fun. It handles it good. I don't have any worries about a break-in. I've done a few burnouts in it. I haven't done any donuts, but I have done some burnouts.
I feel like the true testament's gonna be with the GT30 to see if it goes too quickly through the gears, but I feel like with the 3.5, it's gonna be spread properly.
Yeah, I think if anything, I would want to switch to a 373.
Yeah.
Or 3.7, whatever that ratio is.
I think it's just 3.7.
Is it 3.7? Okay.
He also has OEM mounts for the transmission mount, which are OEM BMW mounts, where this one is utilizing the rev shift mounts, which is a part supplier for the BMW community. We reached out to them and expressed our interest in using them as a supplier for our bushings. So that's who supplies our bushings by default, and unless a customer specifies they want OEM level bushings, which can be found really at any auto parts store. You can see how nice that downshifting rev matching curve is. It's real smooth, there's a little bit of side-to-side play that's normal, but it doesn't feel loose like the factory 4 or 5 speeds. Compared to the KA 5-speed swap that we used to offer, I think this is definitely the way to go. The 240SX 5-speeds have just really become so cost prohibitive to offer a product that we can stand behind. We just couldn't get any rebuild parts for them anymore. We just couldn't get any rebuild parts for them anymore. We were essentially at the point where we had no choice but to put out a subpar product, and we didn't want the hassle. The last 2 that we built, it really troubled the customers, the kind of issues that we ran into, and Really just the issues were stemming from the lack of available rebuild parts. So at least with this TL70 swap, it is very expensive compared to that original 240SX 5-speed swap. But here's the thing, you get a brand new transmission. It's a direct bolt-in, no cutting. You don't have to modify the exhaust. This car has a factory exhaust. We were able to retain the factory exhaust. It retains factory mounting points. We didn't have to cut into the trans-tunnel shifter opening. We just made an adapter plate because this car used to be an automatic, so even the factory S30 manual boot or trim ring wouldn't fit. The holes weren't there, so we just fabricated a plate for this car, but we're gonna actually make a small production run of these just to make it easier for customers who are doing auto to manual swaps. And yeah, so that being said, this being a completely brand new transmission versus a rebuild, and on top of that, you can still get parts for them because they're still being used in production cars today. The other thing is there are a couple of companies that make some upgrades. You can get carbon fiber lined synchronizer rings. I'm sure there are some heavy duty bearing options as well. It's all stuff that we just kind of are going to continue to explore as the market develops. And we sell more and more of these kits and we release more parts for them. Before we close this video out, we're going to share some of the latest information and feedback we've received from customers so far. One of our clients, Mr. Garvin, actually installed this in his 307 wheel horsepower race car and has beat it up quite a bit, and so far he says it has taken every bit of abuse he can throw at it. He's been very happy with it for several track events he's taken the car to. He does have a Z-Story Fujitsubo style header and exhaust, and it is a tight fit, but it does clear without hitting or rubbing so far from what he's reported to us. Alright, we're under Mr. Cleland's car. And this is what the transmission clearance looks like on a turbo setup. This is a ET swapped 280Z. And you can see it clears a 3-inch exhaust quite nicely. Lastly, we typically have been telling people that this transmission is perfect for people staying around 375 wheel horsepower and under. However, we have heard of people pushing these things in other platforms well above 400 to 450 wheel horsepower. So if you're building your Datsun to target 400 wheel horsepower and up, we'd really recommend the CD009 kit we sell. But if you're dead set on this transmission swap, use it at your own risk. Fortunately, we haven't had anybody report back to us that they have destroyed their TL70 gearbox, but only time will tell. That about wraps it up for our final video covering our TL70 6-speed conversion for the Datsun Z Car. Let us know in the comments below what you think. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and most of all, please subscribe to our channel. Thanks again for watching.